Telling the truth is dangerous when powerful evil people who benefits from prevailing lies and therefore doesn't want the truth being known. But we must function based upon what's actually true. You see, in order for a people to liberate themselves, they must first gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of their plight and condition. That's necessary in order to liberate themselves. Because if a people's understandings of their plight and condition are flawed, then all of their liberating strategies and remedies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. This is precisely the true reason why white oppressive forces have spread so much false information into Black communities in regards to our plight and condition. They deliberately spread lots of disinformation into our communities that are deliberately designed to keep our understandings of our plight and condition flawed. Thus, therefore, accordingly, keeping all of our liberating strategies flawed. Those narratives that our collective condition is caused by the silly slave syndrome, Willie Lynch myth, and that our plight is connected to a biblical fairy tale written by our most ungodliest enemies are falsehoods that prevents us from developing the proper counter strategies that are necessary in order to truly liberate ourselves. Keeping us flawed about our truth, the truth of our plight and condition, is how white oppressive forces prevents us from liberating ourselves. This is why those of us who knows the truth must teach. We must teach the truth whether it fills the room or clears it out. Because we are called to awaken the sleeping sheep, not to appease the mentally enslaved goats. Here's the truth of our plight and condition. Unlike at the conclusion of the Jewish Holocaust, when the U.S. government and the United Nations contributed massive financial support to rebuild their lives and restore their culture, there is no moral obligation to do the same for we Africans. Although the African Holocaust lasted hundreds of years longer than the less than 12-year Jewish Holocaust and more greatly decimated the African culture and resulted in millions of more deaths, when slavery was abolished, the US, the UK, and many other white nations that brutally exploited Africa felt no moral obligation to restore the lives and culture of Africans. Those Western nations did the opposite to we Africans. They instead focused on their own self-interest and greed. To protect the white society from massive unified Black retribution, especially given the fact that the white society's systemic oppression of Black people globally and the exploitation of Africa's natural resources continues indefinitely, they instead socialize we Africans. Socialized is when the oppressors exploits their monopoly over the information that are systematically and repetitively fed into the collective minds of the oppressed to manipulate the oppressed to think and behave in ways that are beneficial to their oppressors. The socializing of the oppressed changes the oppressed from within. To be more precise, the socializing of the oppressed is an offensive ideological subversion system that uses disinformation, misinformation, and unrelenting propaganda as a weapon to change the oppressor's behaviors and beliefs in ways that are against their own self-interest and that instead serves the interests of their oppressors. To our own detriment, this is the hidden reality of what the white society has done to Black people. It's the absolute true reason why many Black people now perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies and our self-loathing, and reveres Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. This noted mindset that clearly benefits the white society exists amongst far too many Black people to be coincidental. It's by deliberate design. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed starts thinking exactly as their oppressors wants them to think. It's always the result of the socializing of the oppressed whenever this happens. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice of socializing as merely instilling a value system into the collective subconscious minds of Black people that makes us adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the white dominant society. Black people have been deliberately socialized to think and behave in ways benefiting the white society. People that have been socialized rarely, if ever, learns of this fact. There are 4 ways to effectively socialize generations of millions of people: by what they're taught, by what they see, by what they hear, and through repetition. Because the white society controls the education we're taught, they control the media images we see, and they control the societal narrative that we hear. Through repetition, they've exploited these combined factors to secretly socialize the minds of millions of Black people without most of us even realizing it. The socializing of Black people is also why most Black people no longer yearn for Black liberation, but instead only wants a comfortable position within the system of white supremacy. It's also why millions now self-identify by the N-word. They socialized us to self-identify by the N-word because words, when repeated often enough, have power over our subconscious minds. Repeatedly calling ourselves by the N-word psychologically conditions us to perceive ourselves through a false, inherent inferior identity that aids the white society in maintaining its social dominance and social capital over our lives. Because this entire brainwashing process has been ongoing for so long and has continued down many generational lines, millions of Black people have normalized our current mindset. We have been stripped of our knowledge, culture, and identity, and have been instead socialized to think as we now do, in ways benefiting the white society. Some of you might think that this disclosure sounds ridiculous. However, the socializing of the oppressed is actually a very common nefarious historical practice. Throughout history, those empires that were brutally oppressive, fearing eventual retribution from those they brutalized, have always socialized the minds of the oppressed to think in ways that prevent such acts of massive retribution. Therefore, the beliefs and perceptions and mindset held by the oppressed are never truly their own. They're always falsehoods beneficial to the oppressors that were shrewdly embedded into their collective minds of the oppressed by their oppressors without the oppressed even realizing it. This nefarious practice of socializing the oppressed was never abandoned. It's what has been done and is being continuously being done to Black people through the white society's monopoly over the input of information that we receive, which accordingly allows them to control what we believe. This is all possible because regardless of how intelligent people are, if it's possible to control the information that they receive, it's entirely possible to control what they'll believe and how they'll think. The white society exploits its monopoly over information that Black people receive to secretly socialize us to think and behave in ways that serves and protects the interests of the white society. It's truly mental slavery. Mental slavery is the worst form of slavery because it gives you the illusion of freedom. It makes you revere your oppressors and causes you to make enemies of your own people that are trying to free your mind. The reason why they socialize us is because it's how the white society protects itself from massive unified Black retribution. From the perspective of the white society, the socializing of Black people is deemed absolutely necessary because while the white invaders, through their weaponry advantages of guns, rifles, and cannons, were able to invade, pillage, murder, and enslave Black people, They, however, cannot win our loyalty or sustain peace with us indefinitely unless our minds have been socialized to prevent dissent from rising among us. Because the oppressed always eventually rebels and engage in acts of massive unified retribution against their oppressors. It's the inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are held under long-term oppression. The white society prevents this inherent response from happening amongst the black masses by socializing our minds. Furthermore, the white society's exploitation of Africans has provided with an era of which has flourished most throughout history. To allow this era to end would be directly against the interests of the white society, especially given the fact that the white society's dependence on the great minds of black people that are hiddenly responsible for most inventions that have revolutionized the world, and the white society's dependence on Africa's natural resources are forever. This necessitates that we be socialized. Therefore, by socializing the collective minds of black people, this allows the white society to continue its oppression and exploitation of black people without any black resistance. Welcome to the real world. And don't be fooled. If the oppressors were truly superior, they wouldn't have to tell so many lies and distort so many facts in order to convey it. Nor would they have to work so hard behind the scenes to mentally handicap those who they claim are inferior. I just told you the truth that will lead to the emancipating of your mind from mental slavery. It's the truth that sets you free. When you hear the truth and you know deep down within your heart and soul that it is the truth, and yet you still refuse to act upon it, it is then that your spirit and soul truly begins to die. Because it's that very moment when you've proven to yourself that you are in fact amongst the mentally enslaved. You've been brainwashed to act as wardens of your own mental prison. It's time to elevate your mind above a biblical fairy tale and the silly slave syndrome myth and learn of the true reality of what the matrix truly is. One love and peace.